Okay, let's pick up from the last video and do this calculation for the subsidy. Subsidy is equal to the benefit minus the benefit tax times income. If we assume that the benefit is going to be $80 and the tax is going to be 50%, 0.5, and this person has an earned income of 60, we plug in the numbers, we get the subsidy is equal to 80 minus 0.5 times 60. Do the math and you get $50. So this person would receive a $50 subsidy. Note the difference between the benefit and the subsidy. The benefit is actually $80, but this person only ended up with a subsidy of $50 because they worked and had earned income and therefore had their benefit reduced. The break-even level of income is the earned income at which the individual or family would receive no benefit. It's that point where your income is just high enough to eliminate the entire benefit. To calculate that, we set the subsidy to 0 and then solve for income. The math shows up as the break-even level of income is equal to the benefit divided by the tax. For example, if the benefit is 80 and the tax is 0.5, 80 divided by 0.5 is 160. Another way of putting it is if this person makes $160, their subsidy will be 0. Let's see if that works. If we have a benefit of 80 and we subtract 0.5 times 160, well, that's 80. 80 minus 80 is 0. So any income above 160 for this person would lead to 0 subsidy and really no longer qualifying for the income maintenance program. Now let's look at how this income maintenance program works in our model. Initially, we have a person that makes $10 an hour, and that's revealed by the vertical intercept of $240 in income. You'll notice this person has no non-wage income yet because the horizontal intercept is at 0. So this is our initial budget constraint. They find the optimal allocation by the tangency of the highest indifference curve with the budget constraint. This person will choose 16 hours of leisure and essentially 8 hours of work. $8 of work times $10 an hour is $80 in income. This is the starting point. Okay? Now, what's going to happen next is they're going to become eligible for a welfare program, an income maintenance program. Now, what happens is the budget constraint that we saw before now changes in consideration of this welfare program. To see this change, let's go over here to the 24-hour leisure point. Notice at 24 hours, with the income maintenance program, they're eligible for some income. So they actually have some non-wage income now, as represented by this vertical part of the budget constraint, even though they're not working. How much is that? Well, from the previous example, it's $80 per day. So essentially, if they have 24 hours of leisure, now their income is not 0, as represented by the original budget constraint, but $80. Then, as they work, that is, they move this way, away from leisure, they're going to gain the wage, $10 an hour, but they're going to lose part of their benefit. Remember, the benefit reduction rate is 0.5. So for every hour they work, they're going to get the wage, $10, but they're going to lose 50% of their wage in the form of benefits. In essence, this takes the wage and makes it half. Their wage, in consideration of this program, is going to be $5 an hour. So they're going to move from 24 to 23 hours of leisure to 22, continuing on, and their wage is effectively $5 an hour. You can see that because the steepness of the budget constraint is much less, half of what it is before. The wage was 10, so the steepness of the budget constraint was originally 10. But now the steepness of the budget constraint is 5. Now, once they reach 8 hours of leisure, that means they're working 16 hours. And that means they're earning 16 hours times $10, $160. Well, if you recall, that was the break-even allocation, which means every dollar they earn above 160 is all theirs. They're getting the $10 an hour, and they're not giving up any benefit because they exhausted their entire benefit at $160. So what we've done here is we've created a new budget constraint. The original one was here, the yellow line, and this was the optimal allocation. The new one is the yellow line up to here, and then it goes to the brown line all the way to here. The new optimal allocation is the highest indifference curve, just tangent to the new budget constraint. This person will choose 22 hours of leisure as a result of this income maintenance program. Now, using what we learned in a previous session, let's decompose the changes in leisure/hours worked into the income effect and the substitution effect. And remember, the way that we do that is we create a hypothetical income effect in order to see what would happen if we got this person to the same indifference curve that we know they're going to get to through income only, thus isolating the income effect. Well, let's take a look at that. So from the previous model, we know that we were at U2 after the income maintenance program. That is 22 hours of leisure. Okay? Well, that U2 is on indifference curve 2. So let's ask ourselves, what would we need to do in terms of pure income in order to get this person to this indifference curve with solely an increase in income? And that's represented as moving this original budget constraint up, shifting it up until we find a budget constraint hypothetical that is just tangent. And that's this right here. So in order to get this person to this higher indifference curve through income only, creating purely an income effect, we would need to create this budget constraint. And that means that they would choose, in that hypothetical scenario, U2 prime as the optimal outcome. In other words, the income effect to get to this indifference curve would cause them to take 2 hours of more leisure, to go from 16 to 18 hours of leisure, effectively working 2 hours less. No surprise there, because we've learned that a pure income effect causes people to work less. Now, what is the actual outcome? Well, we know that they went from U1 to U2. We know they went from a tangency of their original budget constraint to a tangency of the new budget constraint. We know they went from 16 to 22 hours of leisure. So if the income effect gets us from 16 to 18 hours of leisure, the only thing left over is the substitution effect, which takes us from 18 to 22. Understanding that there's two effects here is illuminating, because this person is compelled to take more leisure because of that increase in income, but they're also compelled here to take more leisure because of the substitution effect. Now, that's a little counterintuitive from what we talked about. If you recall, it seemed like before the income effect and the substitution effect had opposite effects. The income effect we would expect to raise leisure, but the substitution effect, shouldn't that decrease leisure? Not in this case, because remember, this income maintenance program decreased the workers' take-home pay. And because it decreased the workers' take-home pay, they were getting $10 an hour. They ended up getting $5 because for every hour they worked, they lost half of that wage in a reduction in benefit. The substitution effect, therefore, needs to be analyzed from the standpoint of a wage decrease. And that wage decrease causes them to see the opportunity cost of leisure as lower. Sitting on the couch costs them only $5 instead of $10, and therefore the substitution effect causes them to take more leisure. This is an important element of income maintenance program. It is an unfortunate element because what it tells us is that these income maintenance programs are incentivizing people to take more leisure from an income effect and take more leisure from a substitution effect. You're giving people a benefit, an income, and that's causing them to work less. But then at the same time, when they do go to work, they're getting a benefit reduction, and so their take-home wage is lower, which causes them to substitute towards more leisure. So you get an income effect and a substitution effect that are inducing more and more leisure. And since many of these programs are designed to get people back into work, this economic effect completely undermines that. Okay, let's go ahead and move on and wrap up this chapter with a look at the Welfare Reform Act of 1996. Welfare goes all the way back to the 60s under Johnson's Great Society. And it had a lot of issues, many of them revolving around the analytics we just built. The program was incentivizing people to not work. The longer they didn't work, the more their skills atrophied and their value in the marketplace diminished. And so you have almost generational poverty that was generated from the old welfare program. So by 1996, there was a desire to turn this around. And the components were pretty straightforward. There was a 2-year limit for receiving assistance and a 5-year lifetime limit. So welfare today, you can get it for 2 years at a time, 5-year maximum. Work requirements are part of the program. So you have to show that you're either working or trying to get work. Provisions to help enforce collection of child support. A lot of the people that were on welfare were single mothers. And if the government was going to give them welfare, the thought was the fathers of these children should contribute to reimburse either the government or make sure that the father is paying the child support they're supposed to. It reduced a lot of welfare caseloads. Okay, and you can see this down here. 2 million families back in 1970 built all the way up by 1994 to 5 million, more than doubled, and then dropped off precipitously to the present. There's many explanations for this drop. Part of it is obviously reform, but there was also an economic boom of the 1990s, and so the need for welfare dropped as labor prospects improved. There was tax subsidies that also came around during this period that allowed a lot of working people to get benefits and therefore not be as in need of welfare to take care of the household. Okay? The best example of that is the earned income tax credit, and you can read about that separately if you want to understand that aspect. There was also the benefit time limits, which is part of this program, that encouraged people to conserve their benefits and only go on welfare when they needed it. And finally, welfare benefit reductions, child care expansions, and changes in training programs played a role. There were incentives for businesses to offer more flexible scheduling to single parent households, and also provide daycare for working mothers and fathers. So a lot of things came around to help deal with this. And today, welfare is much more efficient and much smaller.